Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson in our Washington, D.C. bureau this evening, where I'll be joining my colleagues for President Biden's speech. Thank you for joining us right now. The president is preparing to address the nation at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. It will be his first public remarks since dropping out of the 2024 presidential race. Biden is expected to explain why he made the decision and what the path forward will look like for the remaining 6 months of his presidency. His first public remarks since he endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democratic nomination, the speech will also act as a more formal passing of the torch than the one done so far by social media posting and campaign conference call. The vice president spoke in Indiana today at an event for one of the Divine Nine historically black sororities. Her remarks come one day after holding her first campaign event in Milwaukee as the likely nominee. Back in Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed members of Congress Wednesday ahead of planned meetings with President Biden and Vice President Harris on Thursday, as Netanyahu urged the United States and Israel to stand together in his country's war with Hamas. Protesters in Tel Aviv demanded he reach a deal to bring home the remaining hostages in Gaza. We'll get to those stories in a moment, but first, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified on Capitol Hill Wednesday about the investigation into the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. His testimony comes days after lawmakers criticized now former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle in a congressional hearing for her agency's security failures before, during, and after the shooting. She resigned less than 24 hours later. While FBI Director Wray didn't divulge too many details about the investigation, he did offer some new information about the shooter.
Analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally.
For more on this, let's bring in Anna Schechter. She's the senior coordinating producer for CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. And in addition to that new piece of information, Director Wray revealed a few other details about the gunman. What else did we learn?
Well, we learned that the very next day after that chilling Google search, he went to the rally site and cased it. He spent about 20 minutes there. And then again, the morning of the rally, we learned he went and spent 70 minutes there. So he was really spending a lot of time figuring out, and probably all of that planning helped him get up onto that roof, which is, I think, the big question for everyone watching is how could he have evaded so much law enforcement? But to me, what was really interesting is we learned around 4 p.m., just a couple of hours before that shooting, he flew a drone for 11 minutes over a field near where the rally site was. He was live streaming it, so he was watching in real time the images that the drone was capturing. So he was getting a real clear picture of the area from above, possibly including the roof on top of where that he climbed on and where he took that shot.
And how did the director characterize the search for motive that we've been talking about so much since this attempted assassination? Have they found one? What's the search been like? Did he talk about that?
He did. It was interesting. He talked about how few people were in the contacts list in his phone, fewer than you would expect that other, a 20-year-old would have. He talked about his few interactions in real life with other people. So he really described a loner, which is what we were supposing. But it was interesting to have that level of detail in the testimony today. We also learned a few other things, like he purchased the gun from his father who had bought it. So there was a real transaction there, which was interesting. And a few other details about what he was up to in the week leading up to it. There was a question about this ladder. That was pretty much debunked. He purchased a ladder, but the ladder that he bought was never found on the premises. We do know that he brought a backpack and a bike, and he was sitting at a picnic table. We've learned that from local law enforcement, and local law enforcement was concerned enough about him that they took a photo of him. One of the snipers stationed in the building left the building to go look for him and lost sight of him. So that was all in the confusion of those minutes leading up to him climbing up on the roof with a gun.
Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington raised concerns about the political neutrality of the FBI. What was she getting at?
It's a great question. There was a lot of political theater that played out over hours and hours of testimony today, where several Republicans were asking, how can we trust you to conduct this investigation? There was a lot of anger about January 6th amongst some of the lawmakers, and they were questioning the tactics that the FBI used in that investigation. And so what she was doing, I think, is establishing on the record that the FBI is, in fact, neutral. So you saw a lot of back and forth and political theater today.
Not unfamiliar to those kinds of hearings. Anna Schechter, thank you very much. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed a joint meeting of Congress Wednesday. Dozens of Democratic lawmakers boycotted the speech, which comes 9.5 months into Israel's war with Hamas.
For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together. Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane has more from Capitol Hill.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making an argument for a Congress that would have to fund future foreign aid for Israel, that Israel's war is to a degree America's war, that their fight is our fight, their victory is our victory, is what the Prime Minister told Congress today. It was noticeable, though, how there was a political ripple through the room. There were empty seats on the Democratic side of the House chamber. There was one Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib of suburban Detroit, who held up a sign that said war criminal during Netanyahu's address. There was, to be sure, thunderous applause as Netanyahu named and listed the heroes of this war so far and talked about the importance of the war in the wake of the October 7th attack by Hamas against Israeli citizens. The Prime Minister moves on to meet with the President tomorrow at the White House. He will also be meeting this week with the Vice President and Friday at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. But all of this was surrounded today with a metal fence to protect the Capitol complex and thousands of protesters congregated on the north side of the Capitol, some of whom burned an American flag and an effigy of Netanyahu, an indication of the divisions that exist over the war. John?
Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Scott. John Alterman joins me now. He is a senior vice president and director of the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. John, it's good to be with you again. What was the point of this speech? I mean, leaving aside the content and also, I guess, what was the point of the speech? And leaving aside the content, is there anything inherently wrong with Netanyahu coming over to the U.S. to give such a speech?
The point of the speech was really for Netanyahu to reinforce his bona fides in Israel, where his political standing is under pressure. He wants to persuade Israelis that he has preserved the U.S.-Israel relationship, not undermined it. He wants to deliver the messages to the United States that are widely held by Israelis, that this is an existential battle. And I think from both an Israeli political perspective, but also from an American political perspective, the people who were sympathetic to Netanyahu's point of view heard what they wanted to hear. It was an inspiring message. It was a message of solidarity, commitment, and resolve to win this war. Whether that's possible or not is another question, and one that the Prime Minister didn't really address.
Netanyahu says he wants total victory against Hamas. What do you think he means by that? How far is he from that goal at this point?
You know, it's hard to avoid thinking about the mission accomplished banner flying behind George W. Bush in May 2003, because total victory is sort of a feeling that you feel, but the enemy gets a vote. And I think the challenge that the Israeli military has found, and the challenge that the Israeli political leadership has found, is that Hamas is not giving up. Palestinians are not surrendering. There certainly is tremendous suffering. There's a lot of death and destruction, all those things. But the idea that people are saying, okay, we're just going to go home, we'll take whatever you give us, this will be fine. I don't think they're seeing that. What I keep hearing from Israeli military people is they're reflecting what you've heard from a lot of American military people, that there isn't fundamentally a military solution. You need to think about political outcomes. What is the long-term situation in Gaza going to be? What the Israeli military people complain is that the political people keep saying the military people are going to win a victory. We'll just hold on until they win a victory. The military people say it's not in our court. The real victory only comes. How do you get there? What's the day after? And Netanyahu is a little bit vague on that point.
And where does President Biden come in this conversation, and how much has that changed now that his re-election circumstances have changed?
I think that President Biden has been fairly consistent in what he wants. He's been fairly consistent in being unable to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to shift his view. I think that the president takes this as a serious task for his last months in office. To me, there's a window of opportunity that starts next week. The Knesset goes out of session on Sunday, and then there's a 3-month interregnum where Netanyahu doesn't have to worry nearly as much about losing the right wing that's a necessary part of his governing coalition. I think that gives you a little more leverage, but I think ultimately Netanyahu is very cautious about making a deal. I think the Biden administration is much more eager than Netanyahu is to move to the next phase.
John Alterman with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you, as always, John, for helping us out on that.
Always good to talk to you. Thanks, John.
While Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke in Washington, protesters marched in Tel Aviv. Later this hour, CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata reports from Israel. For only the 4th time in his presidency, Joe Biden will address the nation from the Oval Office tonight, his first public remarks since dropping out of the 2024 election and endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now. So, Ed, what do we know about this address and what it'll focus on?
John, this is a White House that likes to stay a little tight-lipped on the big primetime addresses, and it appears they're doing that again. But they have generally said that this is going to be about the next 6 months and an explanation of why he decided to shock the world and withdraw himself from the campaign this past Sunday. There were questions today in the White House press briefing, is this about your health? Is it about the polling? They suggested it has nothing to do with the health necessarily, which sort of seemed like a tacit acknowledgement that, yeah, the polling and the money was drying up. Remember, we reported earlier this week that there's real bitterness among those close to him about how this all went down, believing that he was forced out by top congressional leaders, by his former boss, Barack Obama, who used the press, in essence, to compel donors to withhold funding that has now, of course, shown up in record amounts quite quickly. But expected to focus mostly on what he plans to do to lead the country in the next 6 months.
Ed, how concerned are they at the White House, and how much is this speech going to answer that concern about the charges coming pretty hot and heavy from Republicans that basically there's been a cover-up, that the president's health is not in such decline that he shouldn't be in office, and that's been known for a while, and that they've covered that up? Do you get any sense that tonight's speech will attack any of that at all?
We'll see. There were questions again about it today. We've been asking for the last several days, since we hadn't seen him until yesterday, since last Wednesday, which is one of the longest periods of times, not seeing the American president in public in some way. They continue to say his health is fine, that this was merely a case of COVID, and we were getting pretty detailed letters from his physician every day explaining the quality of his lungs and his blood levels and how many doses of Paxlovid he'd taken. But it doesn't necessarily stop this idea among Republicans and others that something else is amiss here, that this is all a well-orchestrated handoff to Kamala Harris that was always in the works. Based on our reporting here at CBS News, no, that's not the case. He intended to keep going. Things were scheduled for him this week and next to continue campaigning as a candidate, and he just opted Saturday night and Sunday to say, nope, we're not going to do this anymore. And, if anything, the last few days perhaps have shown that there was a huge segment of the population and of the general Democratic coalition, big D Democratic, that just felt it wasn't being spoken to or wasn't needed or had no reason to step up. And now it has, and that is somewhat terrifying to many Republicans who realize now that this race could very well be quite reshaped.
Briefly, Ed, back on the governing and 6 months left question, is there a to-do list that would be that the president would like to get done? A couple of things he'd like to get done in those 6 months, specifically.
He has signaled to campaign and White House staff that he sees a real need to continue shoring up the economy and fighting inflation, working on issues like health care, implementing the big legislation like the infrastructure bill that is continuing to revamp highways and airports across the country. And then there's all the foreign policy challenges like the ones you were just discussing in the Middle East, in Ukraine, countering China, anticipating and perhaps dealing with threats from Iran and its proxies. So there's plenty for him to do. The challenge will be, and you can appreciate this, is remaining relevant and ensuring that the rest of Washington is paying attention to and working and willing to work with him, despite their concerns and their accusations that he perhaps is too ill to serve.
Ed O'Keefe for us. Thank you very much, Ed. We'll have full coverage of President Biden's Oval Office address starting at 7:30 Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are on the trail Wednesday as their respective presidential campaigns shift with the changing political field. Harris spoke earlier in Indianapolis, hitting on what appears to be an emerging theme of her new campaign. Quote, "We're not going back." Meanwhile, Trump is holding a rally in North Carolina as his campaign pivots to go against Harris instead of Biden. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins me now. Bob, thanks for being here. What do you see in terms of Harris's message? We're not going back, that's part of it. What else is she trying to make the case about?
She's trying to project confidence to the country, show command on all these different issues, because she knows, based on my conversations with her advisors, that Republicans are already trying to paint her as a left-wing radical. And that is going to be the message from the Trump campaign, from the Republican National Committee, and so many candidates. So it's as much about policy as it is about personal characteristics, showing leadership, and not differentiating from President Biden, but offering some kind of fresh perspective on a lot of the signature issues.
Let me stay on the Trump campaign. Is there a particular area? I mean, they've been going after the border and the economy with Biden, so they're set on that. Do they see a particular vulnerability with her from the left, or parts of her position set that make her more vulnerable on that charge that she's part of the very left wing of the party?
It's not that they see her as more vulnerable, but they want to reframe how they're going after Trump, because Trump has now been cast as this threat to American democracy by President Biden for a long time. They want to go back to her prosecutorial roots in California and position her as someone who can prosecute Trump about his conduct, about Trump University, about different business ventures he's had in the past. So you will hear more about that aspect of Trump's biography than you would have necessarily heard from President Biden.
Where are we on the Veep question?
I think it's an open discussion. I mean, it's very fluid at this point. I've heard every name floated, from retired Admiral McRaven, who oversaw the bin Laden raid, to the typical names of Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky, among others.
Do we have any sense of timing? I mean, I know, and I should preface this by saying there are more rumors about a vice presidential process than perhaps anything else in Washington. But is there anything about the calendar that puts pressure on her to make a choice?
There is a bit of pressure. They might want to do it before the convention in Chicago, to announce it in early August as part of this virtual roll call, to have a ticket in place if they move forward with that. But as you know, this is an informal process. It can be formalized as a political process. But if she wants to announce it at the convention, she can take that amount of time.
You know the Trump campaign so well. How are when you talk to them, what's the sense you get about, do they see an environment full of rich opportunity with her? Do they see her changing the picture? But how do they see it?
They see this as a reset moment. They've been running against Biden. They're going to continue to run against Biden's record and attach it to her. But this is a summer period where a lot of people are on vacation. The Democrats will have their convention. They do expect her to get, as one source put it, a sugar high from this honeymoon period, as they see it, from people in the media, in their view, from fellow Democrats. Democrats are embracing this candidacy. She has no challenger. But come September and October, you can expect an enormous amount of Republican attacks.
And the idea, one of her biggest challenges was that they were, she was going to get defined quickly by the opposition. Have they moved into place with a central attack? You mentioned they were going to paint her as a liberal. Well, that's kind of not surprising. But is, a way to get to her and define her before she can define herself? It's going to be very personal.
I mean, former President Trump signaled this in my conversation with him, it's going to be personal attacks about her intelligence, her ability to do the job as president. in the sense it's not just going to be an ideological debate. He believes President Biden is the worst president in history, and she's, in his view, the worst vice president. And he has talked about her on the campaign trail as someone who's a strange figure with her laugh. He has gone after that repeatedly. Kamala Harris, the vice president, has said, my laugh is a product of my mother. I laugh like my mother. And so whether these kind of things are effective to be determined, but it's certainly they're going to combine casting her as a left-wing person with casting her as someone who's just a little bit out there.
Final question is on the map. Has anything changed about that, or I mean, it's still the same battleground states, but does anything change about the map of this contest?
She still has to do well in the industrial Midwest to win the presidency. So that those labor coalitions in those states really matter. But the question is, maybe can she put some places in the South in play if she picks someone like Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina? Can she put Arizona in play if she picks Senator Mark Kelly? The vice presidential selection, because it'll have a lot of attention, could be more meaningful than most.
Right. Bob Costa, thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
I'll see you at speech time. Coming up, wildfires continue to rage across the western United States and Canada. We'll have a report from Idaho, where crews are struggling to contain the flames. Plus, Delta is expecting to return to normal operations after days and days of cancellations. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Delta Airlines is seeing clearer skies ahead. The airline says it expects service to be fully restored on Thursday after nearly a week of delays and cancellations caused by the global CrowdStrike software outage. As of Wednesday evening, Delta had canceled only 52 flights, roughly 1% of its scheduled daily trips. That's according to the tracking service FlightAware. Compare that 52 to Monday and Tuesday, which saw nearly 1,200 flights canceled, 1,200 delays and more than 500 cancellations, respectively. Delta said last week's tech outage caused by a glitch that affected multiple industries and businesses affected its ability to quickly restore operations. But federal regulators said the issue showed that Delta was not prepared for the disruptions or to help customers during the fallout. The Transportation Department announced Tuesday it would be investigating the airline. Multiple wildfires on the West Coast and in Canada have forced thousands of people to evacuate. Crews are fighting flames in California, Oregon, and Utah. The fires have burned through thousands of acres. Idaho is also dealing with some of the largest fires right now. CBS News' Jonathan Vigliotti has more. Jonathan?
John, we're here in Boise, Idaho, this state currently threatened by 70 wildfires, many of them burning in hard-to-reach remote areas. One of the first things that you'll notice from where we are, all of this bone-dry vegetation that is blanketing this region. This is perfect fuel for wildfire, and it's been exacerbated by all of the extreme heat. Here in Idaho, we're talking 17 consecutive days of heat exceeding 99 degrees. That's a new record. The heat and the fire also impacting nearby Oregon State, where there are dozens of wildfires burning there, and where we're keeping a close eye on the Durkee fire, which has exploded to more than 200,000 acres, leading to the evacuation of several communities. Those flames also threatening a nearby major roadway. Meteorologists there saying that the fire has grown so big, it is now generating its own weather system, making those flames unpredictable and incredibly dangerous for fire crews to protect and to combat. Meanwhile, to the north of us, in Alberta, Canada, a major fire there leading to the evacuation of nearly 25,000 people. The worst of fire season doesn't typically hit until September. The concern tonight that this is a foreshadowing of more to come, John.
Jonathan Vigliotti. Thank you, Jonathan. More wet weather is hitting Houston just weeks after the city was hit by Hurricane Beryl. The National Weather Service issued a flood watch Wednesday for parts of the city and the surrounding metro area. Anywhere from 2 to 5 inches of rain is expected. Even more is forecasted for Thursday. According to figures in the Washington Post, more than 15 inches of rain has fallen in Houston since June 1st, double what it usually gets. What's happening at the border could have a dramatic effect on the federal deficit. Coming up, we'll take a deeper look at the economics behind immigration. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The man who attacked author Salman Rushdie with a knife in 2022 now faces federal terrorism charges. The new indictment accuses Hadi Matar of attempting to provide support to terrorists, including Iran-backed Hezbollah. Matar is already charged with attempted murder. He rejected a plea deal from state prosecutors earlier this month. Both cases will now proceed to trial separately. Jury selection in the state case is set for October. The FAA and Air Traffic Controllers Union announced a deal Wednesday to ensure workers get more rest. The FAA says controllers will receive 10 to 12 hours off between shifts in 2025. That's up from the current 8 to 9 hour standard break. The change addresses controller fatigue, which the FAA considers a public safety issue. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed a joint meeting of Congress Wednesday as Israel's nearly 10-month war with Hamas intensifies. Overseas, Netanyahu defended the war and criticized American protesters while also trying to bolster U.S. aid. His speech was met with applause from some lawmakers, but silence from others. As Netanyahu was in Washington, protesters in Israel took to the streets, criticizing him for the visit. Meanwhile, the Israeli military is increasing attacks on Gaza. CBS News' Deborah Pata has more, and we want to warn you, some of the images in her report may be disturbing.
Demonstrators marched in Tel Aviv to protest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's congressional address, saying he should have stayed home to secure a hostage release deal.
Seal the deal. Bring them home now. Bring us home now.
In war-weary Gaza, Palestinians also long for a ceasefire. This week saw Israeli military operations intensified there, many taking place in supposed safe zones. Every day, children are dying. 10-year-old Hamza was making a kite with his cousins, 8-year-old Noor and 12-year-old Mohammed, on the rooftop of their home. We were just sitting there, said Noor, when a drone started firing at us. There was green smoke and we were hurt. Little Noor was still in shock as she lay next to her brother on the hospital floor with injuries to their legs. Hamza was hit in the chest. Hospitals are so overrun with casualties that Noor Mohammed was sent home to recover. Their father, Abu Mohammed, explained what happened. They were making kites here. The drone saw them and shot at them, he said. Then they ran, but the drone followed them and shot through the wall. He does his best to comfort his children, who are still in great pain. And one of Mohammed's friends, Mahmoud, stopped by to check on his playmate, worried he was missing out on their regular football game. I was also under the rubble, he said. I feel his pain because I lost 2 brothers. So many Palestinians are dealing with the pain of losing loved ones. And now, this family too must face it. Hamza did not make it through the night. It is time to say goodbye. For those in Gaza and for Israelis whose loved ones have been taken hostage, a peace deal cannot come soon enough.
protesters here are booing as Benjamin Netanyahu's speech is beamed live from Congress here in Hostage Square. They are angry, they are fed up. They've gathered here today to say they're not interested in what Netanyahu has to say. The only thing they want to hear from their prime minister, John, is that there's a deal.
Deborah Pata in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Deborah. A new report suggests that migrants coming to the United States could help the country's financial situation. Analysis from the Congressional Budget Office found an increase in immigration could reduce the country's federal deficit by nearly $900 billion over the next decade. That's thanks in part to immigrants paying taxes and contributing to the economy. This comes as migrant crossings continue to drop. Internal numbers from the Homeland Security Department show July is on track to see some 60,000 migrant apprehensions, down from more than 83,000 in June. And the average number of daily crossings so far this month is 1,800. That's near the 1,500 number that would lift the Biden administration's partial ban on asylum claims. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now to explain what all those numbers mean. Camilo, which immigrants did the CBO report look at, and what was the main takeaway about how they benefit the economy?
Hi, John. The Congressional Budget Office looked at three main categories of immigrants. The first category are migrants who are crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally or at ports of entry with the government's permission. It also looked at migrants who have entered the country surreptitiously and evaded apprehension but are still here. They essentially snuck into the country. And then the last category are immigrants who came here on visas but overstayed them and are now here in an undocumented status. And the main takeaway from this report is that these immigrants are giving a lot more to the U.S. economy by paying taxes, increasing tax revenue, and participating in the economy as consumers than they are taking out of the economy by using public benefits, for example, John, and other expenses associated with them being here in the U.S. And this report estimates that there will be an increase in immigration, a continued increase in immigration, a net increase of 8.7 million immigrants and their children over the next 10 years. And when it analyzed, again, their tax revenues, their participation in the U.S. economy versus the use of public benefits and other expenses, it did find that these immigrants during this time period of 10 years will reduce the federal deficit by $897 billion with the B. So this is obviously a huge number, and that also reinforces other studies that have shown, John, that immigration, both illegal and legal, are contributing to the U.S. economy and are often beneficial to economic growth here in the U.S. There are obviously always caveats to that point, but that is the general consensus that we have found in these studies. That same office, the Congressional Budget Office, earlier this year, John, found that immigration has been one of the key reasons behind the U.S. ability to recover much more rapidly from the pandemic economically than other countries.
Were there any expenses, Camilo, that weren't included in calculating the benefit or of immigrants in this report?
Yes. Yes, the report, John, importantly did not include what we call discretionary spending by the federal government. That is the appropriations that Congress allocates for example, the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Health and Human Services, the two main agencies that deal with immigrants coming to the border. And obviously, the spending from these agencies tends to increase, John, when there's a spike in illegal crossings. So we have to take that into account when reading this report and analyzing it. But it is also important to note that one of the reasons that the report did not include the spending is because Congress, as you know, always changes its mind on how much money to allocate for different functions in the U.S. immigration system. And there's also the question of state and local expenses. This report took a federal look at this issue, but as you know, while immigrants also contribute to state and local economies, these states and localities also spend money on immigrants. And one example is the school system. Schools obviously have to absorb migrant children or the children of immigrants in their systems and also provide them ESL classes and the like for them to fully integrate into American society.
And Camilo, before I let you go, give me the update on these recent numbers about migrant crossing. They're now low enough, the number of migrant crossings by month, that they're bumping up or about to that cap as a part of President Biden's asylum crackdown. So what has to happen? What has to happen first, and then what would it look like if that partial cap gets lifted?
Well, look, John, illegal crossings along the U.S.-Mexico border had been going down for 5 months straight since early March. But that drop has become more pronounced after President Biden issued that executive action you just underscored that is making most migrants now ineligible for asylum and eligible to be deported much more quickly to Mexico or to their home countries. But that asylum crackdown is now conditioned on the number of crossings on a weekly average being above 1,500. But the daily average of illegal crossings now, John, is very close to that threshold. It is around 1,600 and 1,700 per day. And so if that scenario occurs, the number 1,500 is reached, then the Department of Homeland Security, John, would have to lift this asylum regulation. But it is important to note that there is another asylum regulation that also disqualifies migrants from asylum from 2023 that would still remain in place, and that affects people who are not Mexican and who are crossing Mexico and not seeking asylum there. So those asylum restrictions would continue to be in place, John.
Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you very much, Camila. Still to come, a scathing report out of New Zealand reveals hundreds of thousands of people were abused in state and religious care facilities. What the findings mean for survivors and how the government plans to respond. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An independent inquiry in New Zealand found that hundreds of thousands of people were abused in state religious care facilities over the last 7 decades. CBS's Ian Lee has the details.
John, this damning report presented to New Zealand's parliament says an unthinkable national catastrophe spanning decades has occurred. Almost 1 out of 3 people in the care of state and faith-based organizations was abused from 1950 to just 5 years ago. That's totaling roughly 200,000 children, young people, and vulnerable adults. This includes being subjected to electric shock, medical experimentation, starvation, beatings, forced labor, as well as rape. Many of the victims were from disadvantaged or marginalized communities like the native Maori and Pacific Islanders, as well as those with disabilities. Investigators spoke to more than 2,300 survivors who detailed how the abuse usually started from day one. The inquiry reported that even when these abuses were brought to the attention of government or religious leaders, people were rarely held accountable. It also presented 138 recommendations to be implemented. New Zealand's Prime Minister called the findings a dark and sorrowful day in the country's history as a society and added that the government will soon reveal how much it's expected to pay victims in compensation. According to the report, the economic cost of the abuse could be as high as $130 billion when taking into consideration everything from increased mental and physical health care costs to homelessness and crime. The country has a long ways to go, but one survivor called the report historic. John?
Ian Lee, thank you. Now to a digest of some other foreign stories. A plane crash in Nepal Wednesday morning killed 18 people on board. Officials say the plane was carrying mostly mechanics and airline employees. They were heading to another airport in Nepal for regular maintenance work. The pilot was the only person on board to survive. A deadly typhoon is making its way through Taiwan, already killing at least 3 people and injuring more than 200. Taiwan has put thousands of soldiers on standby for disaster relief. Schools, offices, and airports have all been shut down. The storm also brought heavy rain and floods to the Philippines, killing at least 13 people. North Korea sent another wave of trash-filled balloons to South Korea Wednesday. Some of it landed in the South Korean presidential compound in Seoul and in a nearby U.S. military base. Law enforcement says the trash did not pose a danger, and authorities were able to track the balloons and predict where they would fall. North Korea has sent roughly 3,000 trash balloons into its southern neighbor since May in a tit-for-tat propaganda battle with South Korea. More than 2 years after Russia launched its invasion into Ukraine, the country is offering Moscow residents up to $22,000 to fight across the border. The sign-on bonus comes as Russia struggles to recruit enough soldiers. Russia has closely guarded its casualty numbers, but the UK Defense Ministry estimates more than 70,000 soldiers were likely wounded or killed in May and June alone. Russia has recently been launching head-on attacks with waves of troops as it tries to drive back Ukrainian forces near Kharkiv. Wednesday marks the anniversaries of 2 notable events in U.S. history. One is a scandal and the other is a success. We'll start with the scandal. On July 24, 1974, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that then-President Richard Nixon had to turn over the White House tape recordings and other subpoenaed materials related to the Watergate scandal. Nixon initially tried to invoke executive privilege over the materials, but the High Court ruled that confidentiality could not override the needs of the judicial process. Nixon resigned 16 days after the landmark decision because one of the tapes showed he had been involved in the cover-up from almost the start. Wednesday also marks 55 years since the Apollo 11 astronauts successfully returned to Earth after being the first to reach the moon. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin splashed down in the Pacific Ocean in 1969 after spending more than 8 days in space. Their return solidified America's victory over the Soviet Union in the space race. All 3 astronauts were awarded Presidential Medals of Freedom. Still to come, 2 fishermen have a new outlook on life after a surprise encounter with a humpback whale. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
While the Gulf Coast is dealing with dangerous flood threats, parts of the Northwest are seeing some of the most extreme heat in nearly 100 years. To explain, here's meteorologist Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
If you take a look at the overall pattern across the country, you get a high pressure that's building across the west. Temperatures very, very warm. It's also leading to higher fire danger, but a lot of heat for us here, including Phoenix to Vegas. Temperatures 110 plus in a lot of these spots, and a heat danger will last here for the next couple of days. Take a look at the temperatures that we'll see tomorrow, including a 99 in Denver. That'll tie a record high. Rapid City, South Dakota will hit 107, and temperatures to Montana and Wyoming equally as hot. Now, high pressure gives way a little bit toward the weekend. A little bit cooler air could be ushered in here across the Pacific Northwest in particular. And we're also going to watch for abundant moisture across the Gulf Coast. So in the eastern half of the country, it's not about being hot and dry. It's about being steamy and wet. There's a look at the overall pattern with the jet stream keeping us active from Texas all the way to Virginia. What that means is also increased chances for thunderstorms that could bring us some flooding as well. The overall pattern brings in many spots 1 to 2 more inches of rain on top of already really wet ground. Pockets across coastal Texas could see 3+ inches of rain. Now, for more in-depth coverage, you can always watch us live on the Weather Channel and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. 2 fishermen in New Hampshire have a whale of a tale to tell after a humpback tried to come aboard without invitation to their boat, causing it to capsize. This video, taken by nervous but curious teenagers on a nearby boat, shows the moment the whale rose out of the water and slammed into the small vessel Tuesday, sending Greg Packett and Rylan Kenny into the Atlantic Ocean. The men were in the water for less than 2 minutes, though, before being rescued. The Coast Guard says neither the fishermen nor the whale were injured in the experience. On Monday, we told you NBA star LeBron James would carry Team USA's flag at the Paris Olympics opening ceremony. Now we know which female athlete will be joining him for that.
You have the honor of wearing this jacket during the opening ceremony and being a flag bearer with LeBron James.
American tennis star Coco Gauff will be the first U.S. tennis player to serve as a flag bearer for the Olympics. 3 years ago, she missed the Tokyo Games after testing positive for COVID. Gauff is the #2 ranked female tennis player in the world, and she'll be competing in both singles and doubles events in Paris. For the first time since 2002, the Winter Olympics are returning to the United States. The International Olympic Committee voted Salt Lake City, Utah, as the host city for 2034. It didn't have much competition. Not many cities have been interested in hosting the Winter Games due to climate change, making some locations too warm, and because of the high operational costs. But before we get to Utah, the 2026 Winter Olympics will be held in Italy and then the French Alps in 2030. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses Congress while facing international scrutiny. His message for Americans as the war in Gaza intensifies. Plus, FBI Director Christopher Wray testifies on Capitol Hill about the Trump shooting. The new details in the investigation we didn't hear from the now former Secret Service Director. And Vice President Harris and former President Trump take their respective stages on the campaign trail, how the two are shifting strategy with just about 100 days until Election Day. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?